Queen Isabella Montclair stood at the towering windows of Ravenshollow Palace, her fingers nervously twisting the simple gold band on her right hand. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the marble floors, but her mind was elsewhere, trapped in memories of a decision made 30 years ago that continued to haunt her every waking moment. The palace bustled with preparations for the upcoming royal gala, but Isabella felt disconnected from it all. She had spent decades perfecting the art of royal composure, yet today felt different. The weight of her secret seemed heavier than usual, pressing down on her shoulders like an invisible crown made of guilt and regret. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside her private chambers. Isabella quickly moved her hand away from the ring, smoothing down her emerald dress as her personal secretary, Margaret, entered with the day's correspondence. The stack of letters seemed endless, filled with invitations, diplomatic requests, and various royal obligations that demanded her attention. "Your Majesty, the Duke of Westbridge has requested an audience this afternoon," Margaret announced, her voice crisp and professional. "He mentioned it concerns a matter of family importance." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. Family importance could mean only one thing. After all these years, was her secret finally surfacing? She maintained her composure, nodding gracefully while her mind raced with possibilities and consequences. The ring on her finger seemed to burn against her skin. It was not the famous Montclair crown jewel that the public believed she wore, but something far more personal and infinitely more dangerous to her carefully constructed public image. This ring belonged to her first love, a commoner named Thomas Hartwell, whom she had secretly married in a small chapel outside the capital when she was just 19 years old. That marriage had been annulled within months, orchestrated by her father the king, who discovered the union and moved swiftly to protect the royal bloodline's reputation. Thomas had been paid handsomely to disappear forever, and Isabella had been married to Prince Charles Montclair within a year. The world believed it was a fairy tale romance, but Isabella knew the truth was far more complicated. She had kept Thomas's wedding ring all these years, hidden in plain sight as a simple band she claimed was a gift from her late grandmother. Only she knew its true significance, and only she carried the burden of wondering what might have been if she had been born into a different life, free to choose her own path. As Margaret left to arrange the meeting with the Duke, Isabella walked to her private safe, hidden behind a portrait of her royal ancestors. Inside lay documents, photographs, and letters that told the real story of her youth. She had preserved every piece of evidence from that brief, passionate marriage, unable to let go completely despite the years that had passed. The palace bells chimed 4 o'clock, and Isabella knew she had to prepare for the Duke's visit. Whatever he wanted to discuss, she sensed it would change everything. The life she had built, the respect she had earned, the legacy she hoped to leave, all of it could crumble if her secret was exposed. She thought about her stepson, Prince William, and his wife Princess Catherine, who would inherit the crown after Charles. Catherine had always been kind to her, treating her with genuine warmth rather than the political courtesy most royals exchanged. The thought of disappointing her, of tarnishing the family name that Catherine worked so hard to honor, filled Isabella with dread. The afternoon light was fading when Isabella finally made her way to the blue drawing room where the Duke waited. His expression was grave, and in his hands he held a manila envelope that seemed to pulse with dangerous potential. As she took her seat across from him, Isabella realized that the secret she had guarded for 3 decades was about to break free, whether she was ready or not. The Duke's first words confirmed her worst fears. "Your Majesty, I believe there are some matters from your past that require immediate attention before they become public knowledge." The envelope in his hands contained photographs, documents, and evidence that could destroy everything she had worked to build. Isabella's mind raced as she realized that her carefully hidden past was about to collide with her present in the most explosive way possible. The ring on her finger suddenly felt like a ticking bomb, and she knew that very soon, everyone would learn the truth about Queen Isabella Montclair's most closely guarded secret. The Duke of Westbridge placed the envelope on the ornate coffee table between them with deliberate care, as if it contained explosives rather than paper and photographs. Isabella's training in royal composure was the only thing preventing her hands from visibly shaking as she maintained eye contact with the man who held her future in his hands. "Your Majesty, I received these materials yesterday from a private investigator," the Duke began, his voice measured and careful. "It appears that someone has been conducting a very thorough investigation into your background, particularly focusing on the period before your marriage to Prince Charles. Isabella's throat felt dry, but she managed to speak with her usual regal authority. And what, exactly, do these materials contain that would be of concern to you, Duke? The Duke opened the envelope and carefully extracted several black and white photographs. Even from across the table, Isabella could see they were images from her wedding to Thomas Hartwell 30 years ago. The sight of her younger self, radiant in a simple white dress, standing beside the man she had truly loved, brought a flood of emotions she had spent decades suppressing. There are also copies of marriage certificates, witness statements, and several personal letters, the Duke continued, spreading the documents across the table like evidence in a courtroom. The investigator appears to have been very thorough. They even located Thomas Hartwell himself. The mention of Thomas's name hit Isabella like a physical blow. After all these years of wondering what had become of him, learning that he was not only alive but potentially involved in exposing their secret felt like the ultimate betrayal. Had he broken his promise to disappear forever? Had the money the royal family paid him all those years ago finally run out? Who hired this investigator? Isabella asked, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded despite the chaos in her mind. The Duke hesitated before answering. That's where this situation becomes particularly delicate, Your Majesty. The investigation was commissioned by someone within the royal household itself. Someone with access to private family records and the resources to fund such an extensive inquiry. Isabella's blood ran cold. The idea that someone she trusted, someone who lived and worked within the palace walls, had been systematically digging into her past felt like the deepest violation imaginable. She had always known that royal life meant living under constant scrutiny, but she had believed that within her own home, she was safe. Do you have any idea who it might be? She asked, though part of her dreaded hearing the answer. Not yet, but I have my suspicions, the Duke replied. The timing is particularly interesting, coming just weeks before the major royal announcement that Prince William and Princess Catherine are planning. Someone may be trying to ensure that any potential scandals are dealt with before they can overshadow the upcoming celebrations. The mention of William and Catherine sent another wave of anxiety through Isabella. The thought that her secret could somehow damage their important moment, or worse, that one of them might be behind the investigation, was almost unbearable. She had grown genuinely fond of Catherine over the years, admiring her grace under pressure and her dedication to her royal duties. What do you recommend we do with this information? Isabella asked, gesturing toward the damning evidence spread across the table. The Duke leaned back in his chair, considering his words carefully. There are several options, Your Majesty. We could attempt to discredit the investigation, claim the documents are forgeries, or try to locate and silence Thomas Hartwell before he can speak publicly. However, given the thoroughness of the investigation, I suspect that whoever commissioned it has already prepared for such countermeasures. Isabella stood and walked to the window, needing a moment to process the full implications of what she was hearing. Outside, the palace gardens were perfectly manicured, every hedge and flower bed maintained in pristine condition. It struck her as ironic that while everything appeared perfect on the surface, underneath lay decades of carefully buried secrets and lies. There is another option, the Duke continued from behind her. You could consider making a controlled disclosure of the information yourself, on your own terms, before someone else forces your hand. The idea of voluntarily revealing her most guarded secret felt impossible to contemplate. Isabella had spent 30 years building her reputation as the perfect queen, the ideal royal wife and stepmother. The thought of admitting to the world that she had been married before, that her entire royal life was built on the foundation of an annulled first marriage, seemed like professional and personal suicide. I need time to consider my options, Isabella said, turning back to face the Duke. How long do you estimate we have before this information becomes public? Based on the investigator's timeline and the materials I've seen, I would guess we have perhaps 2 weeks, maybe less, the Duke replied grimly. Whoever is behind this appears to be building towards something specific, likely coinciding with the royal announcement. As the Duke gathered the documents and photographs back into the envelope, Isabella felt as though she was watching her old life being packed away forever. Once this secret was revealed, there would be no going back to the comfortable fiction she had maintained for so long. After the Duke left, Isabella remained alone in the blue drawing room as evening shadows crept across the palace. She twisted the ring on her finger, the simple gold band that had started this entire mess 30 years ago. For the first time since her youth, She seriously considered what her life might have been like if she had found the courage to fight for her first marriage instead of accepting its annulment so quietly. The sound of footsteps in the corridor interrupted her brooding. Isabella quickly composed herself, smoothing her dress and arranging her features into the serene expression that had become second nature over the years. She had no idea who was approaching, but she knew that from this moment forward, every interaction would be shadowed by the knowledge that someone close to her was actively working to destroy the life she had so carefully constructed. Princess Catherine entered the blue drawing room with her characteristic grace, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a concerned expression that immediately put Isabella on high alert. The timing of Catherine's visit, coming so soon after the Duke's devastating revelation, felt too coincidental to ignore. "Isabella, I hope you don't mind the interruption," Catherine said, settling into the chair recently vacated by the Duke. "I wanted to speak with you privately about some concerns that have come to my attention." Isabella's heart pounded as she studied Catherine's face for any sign of accusation or judgment. The younger woman had always been direct in her communication, but tonight there was something different in her demeanor, a tension that suggested she was carrying information she found difficult to share. "Of course, Catherine. What's troubling you?" Isabella replied, grateful that years of royal training allowed her to maintain composure even while her world crumbled around her. Catherine opened her portfolio and withdrew several documents, but kept them face down on her lap rather than displaying them immediately. "I've been approached by someone claiming to have information about our family that they believe should be made public before William and I make our announcement next week." The confirmation that Catherine was indeed connected to the investigation hit Isabella like a physical blow, but she managed to keep her expression neutral. "What sort of information?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Information about your past, Isabella. About your life before you married Charles." Catherine's voice was gentle but firm, and Isabella could see the conflict in her eyes. "I want you to know that I haven't looked at the specific details. I thought you should have the opportunity to tell me yourself if there's anything you feel I should know." The kindness in Catherine's approach nearly broke Isabella's carefully maintained composure. After expecting confrontation and judgment, Catherine's offer to hear her side of the story first felt like an unexpected gift. For a moment, Isabella considered telling the truth, laying out the entire story of her first marriage and the decades of secrecy that followed. "Catherine, there are things in everyone's past that they would prefer to keep private," Isabella said carefully. "I'm not sure what this person claims to know, but I can assure you that there's nothing in my history that would damage the royal family or overshadow your important announcement." Catherine leaned forward slightly, her expression earnest and concerned. "Isabella, I need you to understand that I'm not asking as someone who wants to judge you or expose your secrets. I'm asking as someone who cares about you and wants to protect both you and the family from any potential scandal." The sincerity in Catherine's voice made Isabella's chest tighten with emotion. After years of formal royal relationships, Catherine's genuine concern felt both precious and dangerous. The more Catherine cared, the more painful it would be when the truth inevitably came to light. "What exactly are you proposing?" Isabella asked, recognizing that they had reached a crucial moment in their conversation. Catherine hesitated before responding, clearly weighing her words carefully. "The person who contacted me suggested that they would be willing to keep this information private in exchange for certain considerations. They seem to believe that you would be willing to negotiate to protect your reputation." Isabella felt a surge of anger at the implication that she was being blackmailed, but she forced herself to remain calm. "And what sort of considerations are they seeking?" "They weren't specific, but they implied that they want some form of public recognition or compensation for their discretion," Catherine replied, her distaste for the situation evident in her tone. "Isabella, I want you to know that William and I would never support blackmail or extortion. If there's something in your past that you're concerned about, we would much rather deal with it openly and honestly." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Isabella. Here was Catherine, offering exactly the kind of support and understanding that Isabella had never received from her own family when her first marriage was discovered 30 years ago. If Catherine and William had been in charge then, perhaps her life would have taken a completely different path. "Catherine, I appreciate your concern and your offer of support more than you know," Isabella said, her voice thick with emotion she couldn't quite suppress. "But I need you to understand that some secrets exist not to protect the person keeping them, but to protect the people they love." Catherine studied Isabella's face intently, clearly trying to read between the lines of what she was saying. Are you telling me that whatever this person claims to know, it's something you've kept secret to protect others? Isabella nodded slowly, feeling as though she was walking a tightrope between truth and deception. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to bear the burden of certain knowledge alone, rather than sharing it, and potentially hurting people who don't deserve to suffer for choices made long ago. The two women sat in silence for several moments, each lost in their own thoughts. Isabella could see Catherine processing what she had heard, trying to reconcile the implications with her own moral compass and sense of family loyalty. Isabella, I need to ask you directly, Catherine said finally, her voice quiet but determined. Is there anything in your past that could significantly damage the royal family's reputation if it became public knowledge? The question hung in the air between them like a sword waiting to fall. Isabella knew that her answer would determine not only her own fate, but potentially the future of her relationship with Catherine and William, and possibly the stability of the entire royal household. Looking into Catherine's earnest, caring eyes, Isabella made a decision that she knew she would either regret forever or remember as the moment she finally found the courage to trust someone with her deepest secret. Yes, she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. There is. Catherine's expression didn't change, but Isabella could see her processing this confirmation with the same grace and composure she brought to all of her royal duties. Then, we need to figure out how to handle this situation together before someone else makes that decision for us. The next morning brought an emergency family meeting that Isabella had been dreading since the moment she confessed to Catherine. Prince Charles sat at the head of the mahogany conference table in the palace's private family quarters, his expression thunderous as he reviewed the documents that had been presented to him overnight. William and Catherine sat together on one side of the table, while Isabella faced them alone on the other side, feeling as though she were on trial for crimes committed 3 decades ago. 30 years, Isabella, Charles said, his voice low and dangerous. 30 years you've let me live a lie. Let our entire marriage exist under false pretenses. Isabella forced herself to meet his gaze despite the fury she saw there. Charles, our marriage has been many things, but it has never been false. Whatever happened before we met doesn't diminish what we've built together. Doesn't diminish? Charles's voice rose sharply. You were married to another man when you walked down the aisle to marry me. Every anniversary we've celebrated, every public appearance we've made as a couple, every time we've represented the crown together, all of it built on a foundation of deception. William cleared his throat diplomatically, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding before him. Perhaps we should focus on the immediate situation rather than relitigating the past. We need to determine how to handle the fact that this information is about to become public. Catherine placed a supportive hand on William's arm, while looking across the table at Isabella with something that might have been sympathy. Isabella told me last night that she kept this secret to protect others. I think we should hear the full story before we decide how to proceed. Isabella felt a surge of gratitude toward Catherine for her continued support, even as she dreaded having to reveal the complete truth about her first marriage and its aftermath. The marriage to Thomas Hartwell was annulled before I married Charles, she began, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil. It was never legally recognized by the state or the church after the annulment. But it existed, Charles said coldly. You exchanged vows with another man. You loved another man. You planned a life with another man before you even met me. The pain in Charles's voice cut through Isabella's defenses more effectively than his anger had. She could see now that beyond the fury and sense of betrayal, her husband was genuinely hurt by the discovery that she had been capable of the kind of passionate love that their own arranged marriage had never quite achieved. Charles, I was 19 years old and in love for the first time in my life, Isabella said softly. When my father discovered the marriage, he gave me a choice: have it annulled and marry you to secure the political alliance he needed, or be disowned and stripped of my royal status entirely. So you chose duty over love, William observed, his tone neutral but thoughtful. I chose survival, Isabella corrected. I was young and scared, and I thought that love was something I could learn to live without. I thought that if I buried that part of my life deep enough, it would eventually stop mattering. Catherine leaned forward slightly, her expression curious rather than judgmental. But you kept his wedding ring all these years. That suggests it never stopped mattering. Isabella's hand moved instinctively to the simple gold band she still wore, the physical reminder of a love she had never quite been able to forget. I kept it to remember who I was before I became who I had to be. It was the last piece of the person I was before duty and obligation took over my life. Charles stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back rigid with tension. And what about Thomas Hartwell? What happened to him after the annulment? He was compensated for his silence and asked to leave the country, Isabella admitted, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. I was told he had agreed to never speak about our marriage or contact me again. Clearly that arrangement has broken down, William said grimly. Which brings us back to the immediate problem. Someone has been investigating this story. They have documentation and proof, and they're planning to make it public within days. Catherine consulted her notes from the previous evening's conversation. The person who contacted me suggested they might be willing to negotiate for their silence, but I think we need to assume that's not a reliable option. If they have this information, others might as well. Isabella felt the walls closing in around her as the full implications of her situation became clear. What are you suggesting we do? Charles turned back from the window, his expression grim but determined. We get ahead of it. We control the narrative instead of letting someone else destroy us with it. You want me to go public with the story myself? Isabella asked, though she had already begun to suspect this would be the family's decision. It's the only way to maintain any control over how the information is presented, William said pragmatically. If we let someone else break the story, they'll frame it in whatever way serves their interests rather than ours. Catherine pulled out a tablet and began taking notes. We could frame it as a story of young love and difficult choices, emphasizing how you've served the crown faithfully for 30 years despite personal sacrifice. Isabella felt a mixture of terror and relief at the prospect of finally telling her story publicly. After 3 decades of secrecy, the idea of living openly seemed both liberating and absolutely terrifying. There's something else you all need to know, Isabella said quietly, causing everyone in the room to look at her with renewed attention. Thomas Hartwell didn't just disappear 30 years ago. He died in a car accident 5 years after our annulment was finalized. The room fell silent as the implications of this revelation sank in. If Thomas was dead, then whoever was threatening to expose Isabella's secret wasn't working with him directly, which meant the situation was even more complex than they had originally understood. Then, who exactly is behind this investigation? Charles asked, voicing the question they were all thinking. Isabella met his gaze steadily, preparing to deliver the final blow that would change everything. I believe it's someone who discovered Thomas's personal effects after his death and has been waiting for the right moment to use them against us. Someone who understands exactly how much damage this story could cause to the royal family. The revelation that Thomas Hartwell had been dead for 25 years sent shockwaves through the family meeting, but it was Catherine who first grasped the full implications of what Isabella was suggesting. Her face went pale as she set down her pen and stared across the table at the woman she had come to respect and trust. Isabella, are you saying that someone has been holding on to this information for decades, waiting for the perfect moment to use it as a weapon? Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Isabella nodded grimly. Thomas kept everything from our brief marriage, photographs, letters, even my wedding dress. After he died, those items would have gone to his next of kin or been sold as part of his estate. Someone has been sitting on this evidence for 25 years, which suggests they were either waiting for maximum impact or maximum leverage. Charles sank back into his chair, the full weight of the situation finally hitting him. This isn't just about embarrassing our family or causing a scandal. Someone has been planning this for decades. They've been waiting for the right moment to strike when it would cause the most damage. William stood and began pacing the length of the conference room, his mind clearly working through the various implications and possibilities. The timing isn't coincidental. They waited until Catherine and I were about to make our major announcement, knowing that any scandal now would overshadow what should be a positive moment for the crown. Catherine looked down at her notes, then back up at Isabella with a new understanding. Last night, when you said you kept this secret to protect the people you love, you weren't just talking about protecting Charles or the royal family generally. You suspected someone might eventually use this against us. I've had a feeling for years that something was coming, Isabella admitted. There were small signs, journalists asking unusually specific questions about my early life, photographers showing up at places that were significant to my relationship with Thomas, people claiming to have information about my past. I started to suspect that someone was conducting a long-term investigation. Charles leaned forward, his anger temporarily replaced by concern for his family's safety and security. Isabella, Why didn't you tell us about these incidents? We could have investigated. We could have prepared for this. Isabella's composure finally cracked slightly, and, for the first time in the conversation, her voice carried the weight of all the lonely years she had spent carrying this burden alone. Because I hoped I was wrong. Because I wanted to believe that the past could stay buried. And because I was terrified that if I brought it up, you would all hate me for the deception just as much as you would hate me for the truth. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the full tragedy of Isabella's situation. She had spent 30 years protecting a secret that someone else was determined to expose, living in constant fear of discovery while trying to be the best queen and stepmother she could be under the circumstances. Catherine was the first to break the silence. Well, we can't change the past, but we can control how we handle the present. Isabella, you said you believe someone has been planning this for decades. Do you have any idea who it might be? Isabella reached into her handbag and withdrew a small, worn photograph that she placed on the table for everyone to see. It showed her and Thomas on their wedding day, but in the background, partially obscured by other guests, was a figure that made Charles draw in a sharp breath. Is that who I think it is? Charles asked, studying the photograph more closely. Thomas's younger brother, Marcus Hartwell, Isabella confirmed. He was the only family member who attended our wedding, and he never approved of the annulment or the payment his brother received to disappear. I've recently learned that Marcus became quite successful in business over the years, successful enough to fund a decades-long investigation. William stopped pacing and looked at the photograph with new interest. Marcus Hartwell. Why does that name sound familiar? Catherine consulted her tablet quickly, then looked up with alarm. Marcus Hartwell is the CEO of Hartwell Media Group. They own 3 major newspapers and 2 television networks. William, if he decides to go public with this story, he won't need to sell it to anyone else. He can publish it himself with maximum coverage and impact. The realization that their adversary wasn't just someone with damaging information, but someone with the media empire to broadcast it to the world, changed the entire dynamic of their situation. They weren't just dealing with potential blackmail or a single newspaper story. They were facing a coordinated media assault from someone with virtually unlimited resources and a personal vendetta. What does he want? Charles asked, his voice heavy with resignation. Isabella pulled out a letter she had received that morning, delivered by special messenger just hours before the family meeting began. He wants a public apology for what he calls the destruction of his brother's life and dreams. He wants financial compensation for what he claims was the royal family's interference in a legitimate marriage. And he wants me to publicly acknowledge that I loved his brother more than I've ever loved you, Charles. The letter's demands hung in the air like a poison cloud, each requirement more devastating than the last. An apology would be tantamount to admitting wrongdoing. Financial compensation would suggest guilt and set a dangerous precedent. And the personal nature of the third demand seemed designed specifically to humiliate Charles and damage their marriage beyond repair. He's not interested in money or even justice, Catherine observed after a long moment of silence. He wants revenge. He wants to destroy you personally, Isabella, and damage the royal family in the process. Charles stood up slowly, his decision clearly made. Then, we don't negotiate with him. We tell our story first, on our terms, and we face whatever consequences come from that. Isabella, you've carried this burden alone for 30 years. It's time to let us help you carry it. William nodded in agreement. We'll announce your first marriage as part of a broader discussion about the human side of royal life. We'll emphasize the difficult choices you've made in service to the crown, and we'll make it clear that your dedication over the past 3 decades speaks to your character far more than any decisions you made as a teenager. Isabella felt tears threatening for the first time since the crisis began. After years of fearing that the truth would destroy her family's respect for her, their decision to stand by her side and help her face the consequences together felt like a miracle she didn't deserve. There's one more thing, Catherine said softly, pulling out the documents she had received from Marcus Hartwell's representative. He's given us 72 hours to meet his demands. After that, the story goes public whether we cooperate or not. Isabella looked around the table at the 3 people who had become her family, despite the complicated circumstances that had brought them together. For 30 years, she had protected them from her secret. Now, finally, they were going to protect each other. Then, we have 72 hours to write our own ending to this story, Isabella said, her voice strong and determined for the first time since the crisis began. Let's make sure it's one we can all live with. As the family began planning their response to Marcus Hartwell's ultimatum, Isabella finally removed the simple gold wedding band from her finger and placed it on the table beside Thomas's photograph. After 3 decades of carrying the past with her everywhere she went, she was finally ready to leave it behind and face the future with the family who had chosen to stand by her side.